Hey, this is AJ, aka Kebari Kaiju, and I'm going to tie up kind of a classic sakasa kebari. And one of the reasons I'm doing it is there was a question asked me the other day about how you get the forward hackle to just kind of naturally lay forward and how you control how much of it, like how acute it is, how broad it is, etc. So we'll get into that. This actually, I prefer to tie sakasas on a it's a let's see here, it's a Saber number 14 hopper and terrestrial hook. And the reason I like it, it's like a curved nymph hook, and it's got a nice long shank to it, and it's got that just gentle curve through the whole shank that you see in some of the longer bodied traditional kebari. So that's the hook that I like to use for these. Unfortunately, you can't get them in barbless, so I do mash them down and hit them with the file, and I've done that already. These are really simple. You start about a third of the way back on the hook shank rather than right over the eye, and I'll explain why in a little bit about that. So you get your foundation wraps down, 4 or 5 turns, and then you can get that excess trimmed off. Get realigned there, and then very just consistently and methodically. One of the things that I can tell you is a conceit and a cheat that I've used for the few years that I've been doing this is I bought myself a nice pair of 2-power magnifiers from the pharmacy, down the street, cheap magnifying glass, and I use those when I'm tying flies. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when they first start tying flies is really just going too fast. Everybody who's tying flies knows what a good fly looks like, and they know that the wraps are evenly laid and spaced one next to another so you don't get any globby weirdness to them. But when you don't see that up close, like I couldn't see that with my regular glasses or my bare eye, and I wouldn't take the time to do it slowly enough to ensure that those wraps are evenly laid and spaced down there. But when you do it, it becomes very evident and nice and clean. If you can imagine, knitting a sweater and then every once in a while just putting a knot in the yarn and tying it, and how lumpy that would look. It's kind of the same principle with laying down your foundation for a fly. So take the time, use magnifying glasses if you need to, and just get that nice even layer laid down there. So, one layer behind the other. And again, if you spin your bobbin counterclockwise, you can loosen it up and get the strands of the floss to lay down pretty flat. If you spin it clockwise, as you look down the bobbin, you can turn it into more of a tighter cordage rope type thing, and you can actually get kind of visible ridges tied into the fly if that's what appeals to you. Now, there's a couple things about tying these, and people differ on whether you build your head before you put your hackle on. I kind of split the difference, and I will build up the head a little bit here, but I always want to make sure I have an idea where that kind of 1/3 back point on the hook is, because that's where I'm going to tie my hackle in. So I've got a piece of, this is Brahma henback, and I really like it. It's nice and soft. It reacts well to wraps. Generally don't lose control of it. It's got a real soft rachis on it, so it handles being twisted around the hook. And basically what you want to do is you want to strip this downy stuff away and leave, so you've got a nice piece of that rachis there that you can work with. Now, when you tie in for a sakasa, there's several different ways to do it. One of which is to tie it in tip first, like this. So you got the tip of the hook, or the tip of the feather, tied in toward the front of the eye of the hook. Or you can tie it in tip first this way, or belly down. Now, there's a couple things that I've learned in the course of doing this that have helped me out considerably. And I actually, for this tie, I'm going to tie it in belly up and tip first like this. And the reason I want to do that is I want the underside of this feather to be forward, and I can brush those forward, and I also want to control how fat I get with the wraps as I come around. So I'm going to strip those feather filaments back and get them kind of out of the way of this paddly tip of the feather. And we're just going to capture that and give it a couple wraps. You can always use your fingers to preen back those fibers, get them under control. And we'll just trim that off. And it doesn't have to be real precise or real tight to the hook shank because it's going to be obscured by that hackle as we twist it around. I'm going to use a hackle plier. And as I'm doing this, as I'm twisting this, I can go back through and I can preen those fibers forward and make sure that I keep that constant as I bring it around. My hackle plier slipped off, so I'm just going to do this one with my bare hand. Nope. A little fussy there. I'm going to come in with the thread behind it. Keep that rachis facing the eye of the hook, so we got that nice forward hackle. You can see it stays kind of brushy and chaotic. And we'll preen those fibers forward right before we anchor them down. And you don't have to be too delicate with this stuff, especially this Brahma. This stuff's tough. So we get it anchored down. And we can cut that rachis off. Now, if you wanted to, you can build a thorax up behind that, or you could even put one in, you know, some dubbing or a little peacock and build up a thorax. You could just tie it off there, or if you want that slightly back, you can always come up in front of it and put a couple wraps. If it's not leaning forward, you can always build up some thread behind that and just basically just generally build up a foundation that establishes the angle of that forward hackle. And I'm pretty comfortable with that. I think that's kind of a nice natural look. I've got one fiber kind of loose here behind the body. And then the other piece is, and I don't know how well you can see from there, is getting that nice conical section toward the hook shank. So you've got that kind of wedgy body profile from there and a natural taper toward the end. So once you've kind of built up behind that hackle, take a couple wraps toward the back, try and stay nice and even, and wherever you see you're comfortably at your thinnest point, then just work your way back up, keeping it nice and even. Maybe build up a little bit if you've got a hollow there like I did. And then a few turns before you get back to your hackle, come back in with your whip finisher, and you're going to whip finish the whole thing, which is a little bit different than most of the time when you tie Western flies and you tie them up close to the head. You're actually going to get behind that hackle and finish around that. So your finishing tie ends up right there anchoring that stuff forward. A lot of guys have differing opinions on how to finish these in terms of resin, super glue, or whatever. I will still use a dot of resin on these. Trout have sharp little teeth. They tear the threads up. They'll start coming apart pretty easily. And it doesn't take much but a tiny little dot of resin there. And we'll zap it with the light. Make sure I got my light on. A little hard to see. I wear these lenses I've got on are UV protective too, so I can't see the light from this zapper quite as well. That ought to be enough. And we've got our classic forward hackle sakasa kebari.